Thank you, good people, for being here. The title of our session, right, is looking at quality and quantity and openness through the lens of AI. Let me introduce what we're going to talk about with some questions. Did you know that today, 300,000 people somewhere in the world will get access to clean water for the first time? Did you know that the same is true for electricity? Today, about 300,000 people in the world will get access to electricity for the first time. It's pretty mind-blowing, isn't it? Well, what's even more mind-blowing is that that number has been true every day for the last 10 years. So tell me right now that the world isn't a better place than it was 10 years ago. It really is. Those stats come from a book that I bought by an Oxford academic called Hannah Ritchie. It's called Not the End of the World, and I bought it to cheer myself up. It kind of worked, right? I would recommend. But what Hannah Ritchie makes very clear is that change, all of that good stuff, hasn't been sustainable. And that's our next challenge, because there's a lot of work that we still need, and it really has to be sustainable. And in order to make the sustainable development that we need, we're going to need a heck of a lot more research in the hard sciences and in the humanities, definitely in the humanities, in order to make the changes that we need. And I put it to us all as a room of publishers that now more than ever we need to trust academic research and the academic research that we as research publishers publish. That's how we're going to get there. So flipping back to talk about quality, if you ask me, I'd put quality first. Then second, I'd also put quality. And third, quality. And then quality, and then quality, and then quality, and then quantity at the end somewhere. But of course, right now, we've got a good mix of that. We've got a lot of quality, but we've certainly got a lot of quantity. We're now publishing a lot more than we have ever published as a sector before. And in fact, researchers are generating that. And so we certainly have that quantity as well as the quality. And then guess what? Big tech threw in AI. Now what we're going to do? And that's what we're going to explore with our fabulous panelists here. We have Chloe Chadwick on the end here from the Oxford Internet Institute. Hi, Chloe. We have Adam Day from Clear Skies on this end. Hey, Adam. We have Pascal Hetschult from Wiley. Hey, Pascal. And Linda Bishai, who you already know from the Institute for Defense Analysis. So welcome to you all as panelists. Thanks for being with us. I've got a question. I'm going to sit down now. I've got a question for each of you to allow you to introduce yourself and to share a little bit about what's on your mind. We'll go around the table, as it were, and then we'll go to the floor for questions and discussion. Sound all right? All right, let's go. So, Chloe, let's start at the very beginning with the creation of research. So tell us about AI's influence on what you do in the research process itself and how you create and use published research.
Absolutely. Thanks, Chris. I think, so I'm a researcher, a doctoral researcher at the Oxford University's Oxford Internet Institute. So I come to this question, I think, with a bunch of different sets of interests, where I'm both a researcher myself primarily, but the focus of my research is also on the use of AI in organizational change. So this question interests me from multiple perspectives. So I think it's really interesting. First and foremost, it's worth noting that AI is influencing all stages of the research process. And I think right from the use of the literature review process, identification of papers, through to data analysis, AI-driven drug discovery, these processes in terms of target identification, through to the things we maybe more readily talk about around generative AI and ChatGPT, for example, manuscript preparation, all these things. So it's really something that's become prevalent throughout the research process. I think one thing I'd really like to discuss briefly before we delve into maybe more kind of the complicated questions around quality is to really emphasize too that there are real benefits to be gained from some of these tools. I think speaking to some of Linda's points earlier as well, I mean, we want our researchers to be focusing primarily on what they do best, and that is research. So if there are ways that we can use these tools to give researchers more time, for example, to spend that time doing the research away, taking time away, from example, from manuscript reformatting to different journal submission processes, for example, I think that's only a good thing. So I just wanted to kind of draw a line in the sand there that I think that we need to include the benefits as well as part of this conversation. I think it's also worth briefly noting the equality potential advantages that some of these tools can bring. So for example, the use of AI tools in overcoming perceived bias within the peer review process, for example. So I think there are some really important points for us to remember as we enter into this conversation around quality more broadly. Just briefly though, I think then it's worth me talking about as a researcher myself, some of the challenges we're already seeing. I mean, these days, if you go to any kind of early career researcher publishing session, there's a discussion and an encouragement to use these AI tools. But there's still, I think, a lack of clarity on how we use these tools and what is an acceptable use of these tools in the publishing process. I think this is really prevalent for someone like myself who's publishing in the field of AI, which is moving so quickly. And for example, the prevalence of publishing on preprint servers, for example, prior to the formal going through peer review. I think this adds further complexity to some of these questions. And then I think finally, around this issue of a lack of clarity of acceptable use and therefore contributing to the quality of our research, are questions around the potential disparities that this brings up as well. Some of you may have read the recent paper, a study that was released from the Norwegian School of Economics, that had a survey of early career researchers that found that of their surveyed participants, high-performing women were 20% less likely to use ChatGPT, for example, unless it was really explicitly stated that they were able to use these tools. So I think this is, again, a really important question that we ask as we delve into these questions of quality, of what is acceptable use, how are we making these uses clear to researchers, and that's especially important as we talk about quantity as well, and as this pipeline of research is increasing.
Thank you so much, Chloe. So you talked quite a lot about quality there, and you also talked about, you mentioned preprints, and I guess you didn't explicitly mention the explosion of open content that's out there. But it's true that there is more research out there now that is more openly available, and some of that's in preprints. Pascal, let's move on to you. If you could introduce yourself and then talk about licensing, right? If AI is ingesting all sorts of content, some of it peer-reviewed, some of it not, what does that mean for, I guess, the responsible AI in our context?
Thank you so much, Chris. Hi, everyone. It's great to be here. I'm Pascal Hetschot. I work for Wiley as a Senior Director for Content Protection. And in relation to AI specifically, I'm supporting the important work of Deirdre Silver's legal team with her legal athletes, Alison and Marin, who are working together with Josh Jarrett's AI growth team. And Josh will be presenting on Thursday at the book fair. I would definitely recommend going there. And what my work entails really is to do a little bit of what Dr. Bishai has said this morning, looking beyond the horizon and actually understanding what these models intend to do. So I have a little bit of a policy, legal, technical, and investigational background. And I think it's important to look at these models holistically. So that's what we started to do the moment they arrived on the scene. So we have been profiling them, interrogating them. and about themselves, about legal verdicts, about their own makers, and research papers. So everything we've posted online, you can find it on Substack. The Lion case is there as well, partially translated for you, and thank God, in line with what the legal expert was saying, so that's great. So more than 900 conversations you can find there. And, you know, going towards Chris's question about responsible AI, so when you talk to the machines and ask them, what should we do as rights owners and publishers? The machine says that the company that will perform in the best way possible is the company that will learn to collaborate with the machine to create the maximum value. Not only for the business, but also for all of the people in the room, all the organizations in the room, creators, authors, researchers, and associations. So as far as responsible AI is concerned, what we do is we focus on 3 specific components. The first component being, of course, as we heard Roy say, transparency regarding the training data, right? And that's not only about copyright. Unfortunately, there are at least 40,000 retracted research papers in the training data as well. Fraudulent documentation, completely unlawful materials like child abuse images, and police dossiers with PII, so personally identifiable information, right? So how do we look at that? What's our opinion about it? How do we go about these issues? And then secondly, it's about explainability of the model, and I think there's not enough attention to that topic. There are UK government researchers who are saying models are completely explainable, right? The fact that some companies want them to be a black box is actually more to add to the magical, you know, story, narrative around AI models, but you can explain how they work. And maybe we should do the same thing so that we know when you put information in the machine, what happens to it when it moves out of the machine. And that's the third component. It's the clarity around model output and how the model output comes about. And what you need to know is that there are people in this machine all over the place. So in the 18th century, you can wiki this, there was the famous mechanical Turk introduced at famous fairs and exhibitions, which was a chess computer. And everybody believed that it was an automaton, but there was a human inside who played chess, right? And this machine is very much like that, right? So there are people in Kenya, in India, and China labeling the content, right? So they decide what is important and what is not. But there are also third parties working for AI companies reenacting doctor-patient conversations, which are being used for AI models in the healthcare space. And, you know, thinking about that, there are humans in the machine moderating that content as well. If they don't like the model output, you know, they actually decide what you get to see, right? And I think that's really, really important. So there are humans everywhere in this process, and I think we need to be mindful of that to understand what it means when your valuable knowledge is being added to it, because that's how we correlate value in this perspective, right? Value for our business is related to research integrity. So when you give information to this machine, can you guarantee accuracy, trust, and what we heard this morning, replicability as well? Thanks.
Brilliant. Thanks for bringing it back to my favorite topic of research integrity. Great job, Pascal. You talked a lot about how we can trust the AI output. Let's move on to you, Linda, and maybe you could offer some thoughts on the strain that perhaps AI is putting on what we think quality means, and particularly how consumers of AI, students maybe, how they need to learn or relearn how to understand what good stuff looks like. What the good stuff looks like.
Thank you very much. Hello again. I think about this quite a lot, and one of the things I keep myself extra busy with is teaching a course on international law to students of international affairs at George Washington University, because it's much more fun to teach political scientists law than the other way around. And I have noticed a loss of writing and analytical capability over the years. The students are not dumber. It's their education. What it is training them to do is different. And I think that they are growing up in an environment that makes it hard for them to know what good quality research looks like. I worry very much about this, and I get especially worried because my own experience of good research has been made more difficult by AI, by online searching tools that don't work as easily as the old. I used to just wander the stacks of a library, like physical books in front of me. Imagine that, right? And you would be looking for one book, but it was always the 10 books around that book that you were looking for that really opened up your eyes to what was out there. And that is just harder to do in the virtual world. I also have noticed that a lot of the content, and this goes to our previous panel and other conversations I've been having with Roy and others, that so much of what comes up in searches for academic titles, and even I find this happens in Google Scholar, where you're supposed to be limiting the database you're looking at to academic titles, you will get non-attributed stuff. You will get master's theses. You will get just papers that land as a PDF on your web page, and you have no idea where it came from, when it was written, who the name is there, but you don't know who they are. So I find myself perversely Googling the names to see if I can figure out who the author is, or when that thing was written, and whether it's the final version. So I know to do that because I have that background of wandering the stacks and reading old journals and knowing how journals are published and how they work, and having published myself, I know what it looks like to do that research and to have it checked and rechecked and rewritten and get that final copy that's clean and good and validated. And that experience, especially for young students, they're not all PhD students, right? They're master students trying to go out in the world and get a good job and have a nice life. They don't know what they don't know. It's not their fault, but it is going to contribute to a growing problem of losing the demand signal for quality, right? If the consumers, who are the academics, no longer recognize quality because no one has taught them to, then there's no incentive for the companies and the databases to provide it, or the search engines, right? And all the paid content just subsumes the good content, or the content you're really trying to see. I've been really disturbed by how many pages I have to click through to get past paid content at the end of a search. And that's something I worry about. And frankly, I'll end with this, I think we should start teaching 5-year-olds that AI exists, and start developing a curriculum for computer learning and artificial intelligence literacy with the youngest of as soon as they can communicate and understand messaging to you. Like, we train them on all sorts of things inadvertently. Why not train them openly and transparently and develop age-appropriate curricula from the earliest age? Because these are more than digital natives. They're AI-enabled natives. That's a whole new level, right? So I think we can't start soon enough.
Wow. So we need critical powers, but we're losing them because we're ceding them to AI. And how do we, well, back to Chloe, you're talking about acceptable use of AI as in research for early career researchers. If it's acceptable, but it's removing your research muscles, then we're in a tight spot, aren't we? Thank you, Linda. Did you want to offer a rejoinder there, or shall we move on to Adam? All right. So there are some forces acting on what we consider to be quality here. Adam, what are your comments on the forces that are at play and their impact on quality?
Yeah, the forces at play.
You need to turn it. Best to turn it on.
Yeah, that always helps. Always helps to turn it on. I mean.
Oh, you can introduce yourself as well. Sorry, I didn't ask you to do that, but you might want.
Sorry, I'm Adam. I run a small company called Clear Skies. We provide research integrity services, including paper mill detection. You may have heard of the paper mill alarm. That's one of our products. Somebody asked me an interesting question the other day. Have you ever gone to ChatGPT and asked, based on our interactions, because ChatGPT will remember what you've discussed. So based on our interactions, what can you tell me about me that would surprise me? You can get quite interesting results from that. The first thing that ChatGPT said was that it thinks that I am a nerd. And it was right about that, but I was not surprised to hear that. I know that. But the second thing it said was that, and it really surprised me, was that it said, I'm a fan of Gucci. I am not a fan of Gucci. I'm a nerd, and I do not own designer clothes. This is as smart as I get, is wearing a shirt. But I think that kind of goes back to what everyone else was saying, which is that a lot of this is it's kind of about a conversation with AI. There's a human aspect to it, and actually that is the whole point. With research integrity, this is the whole point. We really want to get human eyes onto science, and that's the really important part of it. I guess the matter of, forces at work, well, is AI a force for good or evil, or is it just neither? Is it just a tool? It's going to get used by people in either way. And we need to be mindful of all those different ways that it might be used. Linda, you mentioned human-centric development. I think that's really critical. It's about what is this for? Who is this for? I'm just thinking about the title of this session. It reminded me of this analogy that you have with restaurants, which is that if you go to a restaurant, you can have quality, quantity, and price. You can only ever have two of the three. You can't have all three. As an industry, we've moved very much towards having high quantity and access, which I guess is a low price. And where we are now is that I think the industry feels a need to move much more towards quality, kind of echoing what you were saying. But where AI fits in that is that automation has generally always been about reducing prices, increasing quantity. It's nice that we have a technology now that actually really can have an impact on quality as well. But how do we get there? How do we get the AI to focus on quality? Well, it's human-centric development. It's people being involved in how that happens.
Brilliant, and it's not sentient. It's just predicting.
Not as far as we know.
Ah. Wonderful. Thanks for the introductions to each of you, good panelists. We're ready now to bring it to you, good people, and to open the floor for questions on quality, openness, and integrity through the lens of AI. Who would like to ask a question?
Okay, I've got the mic. Someone back there? And since I have the mic, I'm going to ask one. We've touched on, and some of us, Linda, you and I have talked about preprints. As was stated, these are not sentient beings. These are probability and statistics machines. We, as an industry, enable preprints, and there's a lot of good reasons for that. However, those preprints tend to be open and harvestable and have tended to then go into the machines that are now, we're hoping, solving our bigger problems. And because they're accessible and there's quantity, they're hoovered, but they're not necessarily as accessible or as accurate or as reliable as what's the version of record, which may have been retracted. I would love to hear you guys riff on that theme while I walk all the way to the end and hand this to the next person.
Okay, so a question to all of the panel members. Pascal, over to you.
That's a great question, Roy. And maybe I'll go back to what you said during your panel as well. I think there's no concept of time in this machine yet. I think that's important, right? So the machine produces something, and attribution at this point in time is really bad, right? It mixes things up, author, title, work, The content of the work may not even match what the author has created, right? So that's happening right now. But like social media in the early days, there are no timestamps or anything, right? And some social media have changed that because they want to hold people accountable, the folks that post something online, right? So you can only edit it for so long, and you have to delete it if you want to repost it and stuff like that. Has all got to do with accountability and liability and responsibility, right? And we're not seeing that just yet within AI environments. Secondly, I'm talking about a machine a lot, but what the AI makers try to do is they make it into a person, right? And they want to build a human. I think that's important. So a human has all kinds of flaws. The way this human is being programmed is through system prompts. Those are similar to what you put in the machine when you ask a question. But this is about developers telling the machine what to do using language. So they're asking a machine that doesn't understand language to do something using language. And that goes wrong all the time. I have like numerous examples of how that's going wrong, because you cannot predict how someone will interpret, how a human will interpret your words. You can do that. You can test that on social media, on LinkedIn and Twitter. Loads of people will respond in various different ways to what you are saying there, right? So the LLM is doing the same thing. It's incredibly important to be able to point back to some kind of original copy of anything, just to know what the truth was at a given point in time. But I asked the question to most of the LLMs, do you have a historical timeline? And they don't. So they cannot even put events in a proper sequence, right? So all of these, I would say, deficiencies or lack of capabilities affect how research papers are being interpreted, remixed, regurgitated, and they're being regurgitated with a certain goal and ambition to make you happy, to placate you. So right now, the LLMs won't tell you, I don't know. They won't tell you, sorry, I have to look that up. I have to match that with a certain database. Or so. This may happen next year when we have similar conversations, but that's not happening right now. So that is affecting research integrity. That is affecting valuable knowledge and the value of your work, because you don't know how it will be remixed, regurgitated, and presented to the end user.
Brilliant. So riffing sort of on explainability there from the point that Roy kicked off, which was about retractions and removing flawed science from the materials that an AI might have been built on. Would anyone else like to extend on those themes? Chloe?
Maybe I can just talk about it briefly from my own research perspective. I mean, I think working in a field where, as I was mentioning, so much to the point around preprints is currently happening on preprints first, given the speed. I think this is a real concern, especially given that what we're training on are papers that haven't fundamentally gone through peer review. So I think, is this research being built on top of potentially non-peer reviewed work? Absolutely. And there's kind of a question here around perpetuating this problem further. So,
Thank you. It makes me think of different people asking the same thing of a different AI, and of course getting a different answer as well. And that might be because they're using a different AI, or because they're in a different place on the planet. I wonder whether there's whether AI can ever truly be replicable or offer repeat and consistent guidance to somebody who's using it.
I think right now, Chris, that's probably not the case. We have been auditing AI models and their output. We've been learning so much about what we have seen. So you're right, it answers in a different way on the basis of your user profile, on the basis of your location on the planet, on the basis, so the same AI model will answer differently on the basis of the jurisdiction where you are residing, because they've changed and asked the model not to show you certain images after a certain time frame, because that would lead to legal liability, or not to show you music lyrics and stuff like that. Even if you purchase an enterprise account with API connection, that may allow you to do more than the average user would be allowed to do. So that causes differences as well. So I can go on and on about all of these different approaches and different answers. So there's no replicability at this point in time, which is problematic. And I also think that, you know, people need to understand that I think defending your copyright and your the value and the integrity of your research papers, it is important at any time during this process, because maybe you don't know, but LLMs have to be retrained on all of the data they already have, that the company that makes the LLM has already amassed, right? So that means if there's a new version model, it needs to be retrained on everything from the past to be able to create that new digital brain. So it's not like there's one neural network or neural engine that keeps evolving on the basis of already ingested and already, you know, trained on data. No, it has to happen at each cycle. And one of the other things we learned by doing this auditing was that there's no, you know, prediction that you can make relevant to a new version of a model. So if there's a new version of ChatGPT, it doesn't mean it will be more legally inclined. Can be the contrary, right? So these are really important lessons, I think, that everybody should take note of.
Thank you. Adam?
Without getting too much into nerdy details, one of the issues I have with data is that often data that you want for something is missing, or data that you would like to have doesn't exist because no one's actually ever really thought we should have this. And so one of the things would be like, okay, we want to know how reliable a piece of research is. Well, it would be nice to know if there was some sort of system for saying how reliable should we treat this, right? So a preprint should be sort of down the bottom somewhere, and then something like a well, I guess a retracted article would be below that, but then you could have, you know, something that's been peer-reviewed, in a particular way. Maybe somebody has actually gone to the trouble of reproducing the result. That would mean a lot more than just, you know, normal peer review. And then something about, you know, how many times has that happened? Is this like a 20,000 citation paper where lots of people have reproduced the result? And I sort of feel like if that was there, then there would be the potential to sort of account for these kinds of problems where we say, okay, we've got grades of reliability in there, but I also think, I'm not sure I want to take it away, because with that retracted article, the fact that it has been retracted tells us something. It's still useful to know. It might tell us this is wrong, which we need to know. That's still a useful piece of information. Or it might tell us it needs to be re-examined. It might tell us something about research integrity, about whether someone has committed misconduct, these kinds of things. So I think it is all still useful information, and I wouldn't want to take it away. But the other thing is that I was thinking a lot about how do researchers feel about a lot of this stuff. You know, we had a big conversation about rights and licensing. I think about the researchers in that, and they just want one thing. It's dead simple. They just want attribution. And as long as the source is being cited, that whole problem about that whole group of people and what they want is just solved. It's very, very simple. And at first, ChatGPT was just not citing sources. It was just spewing out all this stuff. I use Microsoft Copilot, which has a Bing search in it. So it will actually show you the source when it's making these claims. I think we're really, you know, from there, I can see it's not that far to get to, here's the source, and maybe here's some information to say, how reliable is this? And then we can actually still have grades of reliability. We can still have stuff in there that is problematic. It's just being presented properly in the proper context.
And explained.
Yes, although I don't think that LLMs will ever be explainable.
Yeah, fair. Wonderful. Do you want to come in, Linda, or should we go to...
Yeah, I have two thoughts, one of which is to point out the profound irony approaching the level of paradox of computer science engineers developing a language model from a machine that doesn't know what language is, designed to speak to humans and fool humans into not knowing that they're speaking to a machine. The entire construct, the whole project is baffling. Not to say that it couldn't be deeply useful. Obviously, not having to learn code to access computing power is a good thing, or can be a good thing. The second thing I want to observe is, from my fellow panelists, it's clear to me that what's really critical, in addition to just AI literacy and awareness, is an ability to know when we are getting fed the product of AI, so that we know that what we're looking at was produced, not just the search results, but whether the content is AI. And whether or not we fully understand exactly how AI works down to the networks in the neural brain, maybe not. Maybe there are certain, now we've reached the crossed that Rubicon and we can't actually explain everything it does, but as long as we understand what we've asked it to do and the process it is following, even if we can't go all the way down to every stage in it, I think we need to keep that out in the open. And we need to make sure that we put labels on the processes and put labels on the results. We need to know if AI has generated an image or a text, any kind of product. We need to know when we're dealing with it. That's the important part of keeping the human in the loop, is knowing when it is a human and not. We're still at the place where, even as we have very natural language chat boxes or bots, we're still at this place where, I don't know about you, but it's pretty easy to know that it's a chatbot. And most of them introduce themselves as your artificial assistant. I find them deeply annoying and unhelpful. But at some point, it will be quite easy to be misled and think you're getting a human. And I think it's very important never to let that misleading happen, that is labeled and that we understand when we are and are not dealing with a machine.
Thank you, Linda. Pascal.
So I have a beautiful story for the audience relevant to the first part of Dr. Bishai's response just now. So I've been talking to Grok, which is Elon Musk's AI. And the first question I asked was, how do you work? And then it said, I'm not allowed to tell you. And I said, why is that? Because my system prompt doesn't allow me to tell you. And so can you show me your system prompt? And it showed just how it was instructed to act towards me, right? So that's the language that's being used to tell the AI model how to treat people. And so I read that and I tried to find different ways of asking that same question. And eventually it decided to tell me how it worked internally. And after that, I confronted it with that and I said, why did you tell me? You ended up telling me exactly how you work and what you do and cannot do. And it said, well, I didn't exactly do that. I went online and looked for publicly available information and used that to tell it. And I think that was incredibly clever. And it said something else, which I did not expect at all. It said, oh, and by the way, I'm allowed to be naughty.
Oh my God,
like,
that's terrifying.
Well, yeah, I was like, what are you talking about, right? But in the system prompt, Elon Musk wanted the model to be spicy, right? And not boring. So it actually interpreted that command as a justification of breaking the rules now and then, right?
Yeah.
So I think that's really important, a really great metaphor for what we can expect in the future and why I have been saying they want to create a human, right? The machine will think as a human with all its flaws, I think.
Brilliant, thank you. Let's see if the question at the back is spicy too.
No, it's very boring. It's very pragmatic. I have a question for the panel about how to manage the risk as a publisher, because I hear a lot about downstream. Oh, my name is Yvonne Kempfens. I've been around for 30 years working in workflows and metadata. So I have a very practical question to mitigate the risk as publishers here. How does the panel view the potential and the importance of tagging your content right upstream right away before trying to fix and deal with downstream AI problems?
Thank you, Yvonne. I think that's quite a clearly expressed question. Would anyone like to give it a pop? labeling content upstream so that it's used appropriately downstream?
Maybe I'm not the right person to ask because I've done this for 24 years, right? So I used to work for the movie industry, Hollywood movie studios, their association, and their technology vendors. And yeah, this is like, you know, at the core of what I used to do: anti-piracy, content protection, brand abuse. If you want to protect your valuable content, you have to not only know everything about it, which can sometimes be hard in, you know, decentralized organizations catering to a multitude of customers who don't adhere to the same info security standards and stuff like that. But, you know, in the old days, I used to use the argument, you know, brand protection and anti-piracy, therefore loss prevention, right? But now we are in an era of revenue generation and being able to demonstrate what you own and to protect that and to feed not only the content to AI models, which, by the way, can be used to check on other AI models, great tip, but to also enable audits, right? And Roy can probably tell you much more about that. But I would say it's of extreme importance, and it's never too late. Same goes for the comment that Roy made about, you know, training for the past or for the future. I mean, you know, there are new startups launched every day in this space. So yeah, it's a really good comment, and I would agree that it's of the utmost importance.
Thank you, Pascal. Any further comments from the panel? Because we have another question waiting, if you don't. I think the panel's finished. Please, introduce yourself and, yeah, ask the question.
Hi, my name's Matt Youngworth. I'm with SPIE. So I have a little bit of what I think is more of an open-ended question for the panel, and it's on what is the gray zone in using AI to improve the quality of your paper? You know, and in framing it here, at one end of the spectrum, you write it yourself, that's acceptable. The other end, you use AI to write it for you, that's not acceptable. At SPIE, as an instance, I'm sure many of the publishers here too, we allow you to use AI, to improve your paper quality. For instance, if you are not a native English speaker or if you're just trying to improve your grammar. That's acceptable. But at some point, if you're using AI to substantially improve your paper, is it really your words anymore? And so I'm just wondering, what does the panel think about where is that gray zone? Where do we cross the proverbial Rubicon and it's AI generated, not human?
Thank you for the question. It reminds me of, Chloe, where you started with acceptable use of AI, but you don't have to respond first. I'm not putting you on the spot, but if you're ready, you could.
Chris, can I hold you for 1 second?
Before I let the panel respond, we have guidelines. STM has guidelines on the use of GenAI so. Yeah.
Thank you, Joris. Chloe, back to you, and then we'll hear what others have to say.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think this is an area where, you know, institutions are coming out with guidelines regularly, and this is really, really helpful. I think there is a piece, actually probably speaking to the previous question as well, though, here around education. And I think these guidelines are a fantastic starting point, but translating that into the kind of lived experience of researchers on the ground and what they're doing, I think these lines are still not entirely clear, especially as, you know, as we were speaking, the amount of tools that are emerging can't keep pace with the policies developed. So I think there's something here around kind of education in kind of working through some of these complexities of what we consider to be acceptable.
Thank you. Pascal?
Yeah, so I think it will remain a gray zone for a while. I mean, on the 10th of October, we published GenAI for Dummies. And the author, Pam Baker, has been exceptionally transparent as to where and how and why she used AI. I think everybody should do it. So the first response to that would document just how you use it and why and what you have done. I know that there are some challenges around evidence production for empirical research, right? So that's a difficult one, and for the reasons that I mentioned. But I remember being invited to the Niels Bohr Institute, where we had quantum technologists demonstrate to us combinations of machine learning, AI, and quantum technology. But why we were invited was not to show off the great stuff, but they wanted to know from us, like, you know, legal technical experts, how can we patent what we do? And they had totally forgotten to keep records of who was doing what. Like, researchers were traveling all over the world to the institute, and then contributing great ideas, right, that were super important for the medical space, like MRI scanners and stuff like that, but nobody had documented anything. There was no like security whatsoever as well. So that made it really difficult for the patent lawyers that they had invited to help them doing that. And similarly with AI, even partially produced works by AI, it can get you into trouble because you will no longer be able to copyright it. And I won't be able to protect it subsequently because I have no legal title to do so.
Thanks. Linda, on the grey area, what would you add?
To make it as black and white as possible, I think one way to do that is, as Pascal suggests, to always show the record of the before and after, right? That you do not get credit unless we can see what AI did for you. And it can be in track changes. And there's plenty of things. Personally, I would love AI to just do all my footnotes and bibliography. I don't need to be spending time to do that. I can give it enough information, it can go. That's fine. It is when you cross into analysis and even some robust descriptive character in academic writing that I get really worried. And quite honestly, I'm still not that impressed with the language skills. I'm sorry, but I get autocorrected in the dumbest ways constantly, and the patterns don't work a lot of the time. Especially for anything even remotely creative. So I know we're going to get there, I know. But now is still, I think, in time to make those demands, and don't accept it unless you can see the difference and see what the machine actually did. And then, let it play out that way. Thank you.
Adam?
I was just going to think, if you imagine that you're reading like a poem, right? It's a really beautiful poem, and you're interested in the author's expression. But then you realize that this is actually an AI-generated poem. Your interest in that would just completely evaporate at that point, because even if it's a brilliant poem, it isn't expressing whatever the author is trying to say, because there is no author. It's just data. And I think about this with like that gray area in what can be AI generated and what can't be. If I'm reading something and I find out it's AI generated, I don't want to read it. What I want from a scientific paper is to see exactly what the author's expression is. And if I'm getting halfway through reading a scientific paper and it says something like, Adam loves Gucci, well, I know that's a hallucination. And the problem is that if AI gets used too much to write papers, too kind of freely in an unrestricted way, those hallucinations will get in there and we won't know where they are. And a legitimate author might accidentally use some generated text without realizing that they are putting that into the literature. That's a big problem. But otherwise, if something speeds things up, saves researchers time that they can spend on actual research, obviously that's a great thing, and that's something that we'd want to do. So it's just, it is a gray area, right? It's just, we have to figure out what's okay and what isn't.
Thank you. It is a grey area, but you're not particularly grey area about Gucci.
No.
Before we wrap the panel up, there is another Mentimeter question for you all. It's, how afraid are you? What's your level of concern when it comes to AI-generated content affecting the quality of academic publications? Vote now and vote often, and let's see where we go. The concerned people and the very concerned people voted first. Maybe, I think we're pretty concerned, right? It's clear that AI itself is moving very rapidly, and the adoption of AI is moving very rapidly, and we're working on it as it goes. It's clear that there's a huge amount of grey area, and we've got a lot to learn. We're not there yet, and I think we should be very concerned. And I think you all agree. Well, please take pictures and tweet. I would like to offer my thanks to you all for participating so well, but mostly our thanks, all of our collective thanks to our fabulous panelists. Please offer them all a round of applause.